Welcome to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. Today's story is called The Kitty Bear, an adaptation of a traditional Christmas story from Denmark written for you by Daniel Hinds. Thanks! Enjoy the episode! The Kitty Bear. Once upon a time, a man and his bright white bear were pushing through a terrible storm on Christmas Eve. The man was a bear trainer, and this particular bear was to be a Christmas gift to the King of Denmark. They had hoped to reach the king's castle in Hillerød before the storm got too bad, but the cruel winter winds had blown it in early. The snow fell silent but heavy, like thick wool blankets falling from the sky piece by piece. It weighed them down and made each step feel like a mile. "Well, Beorn," the man named Dirch said to his bear, "looks like we won't be feasting in the castle tonight after all." "Bror," said Beorn, thinking of all the royal fish he had hoped to eat. "Rum brum brr." "It's okay," Dirch said, his voice strangely muffled by all the falling snow. "We'll stop here and dig out a shelter. It won't be as cozy as a castle, but it'll keep us warm, and we can make it to the king tomorrow." Beorn growled in agreement, burying his bright white face and dark black nose into the snow and then churning into it with his giant paws. Dirch stooped to help him, and then a strange sound came over the wind, freezing them both in their tracks. It sounded like a wicked cackle from a giant witch. Dirch and Beorn looked at each other and then stared into the endless storm. "Well, maybe we should just go a bit further, right, old boy?" "Bror," the bear agreed. They started trudging onwards again, each step fighting against the snow now piled up to Dirch's waist and Beorn's broad chest. Behind them, they could hear the wicked cackle again and pushed on as far as they could. Soon, they saw some lights flickering by the side of the road. They headed towards them, the snow so heavy that they didn't realize they had found an inn until they tripped over the front porch. "Look," Dirch said, picking himself up and brushing the snow from his hair. "We're in luck." "Bror," agreed Beorn. Dirch and the bear muscled their way to the door and pulled it open. They were greeted by a blast of warm air and the smells of roasting dinner and a crackling fire. "Well, hello there," called a woman, stirring a pot of stew over the fire. "Quite a storm out there. Wasn't expecting any guests tonight." She did a double take, looking at the snow-covered Beorn. "Especially one with a pet snow bear." "Well, we weren't expecting it either," said Dirch, rubbing Beorn between the ears. "I'm Dirch, and this here is Beorn." "I'm Ida. Nice to meet you, Dirch and Beorn, but you may want to move along," she said, turning away from her bubbling pot. "I don't think it's safe for you to be here tonight." "Why not?" Dirch asked. "Because of Beorn? Don't worry. He's a big boy, but he's harmless. Isn't that right, pal?" "Bror," Beorn agreed, sniffing for the stew. "Oh, it's not about you," Ida said. "Every Christmas Eve we have unwanted visitors. Dangerous ones." "What do you mean?" came the rumbling, cackling laugh from outside. "Oh no," Ida said. "They're here." "Who is here?" asked Dirch. "We heard that same sound outside." "Bror," said Beorn. "Those are the unwanted visitors," Ida said. "Every Christmas Eve, 3 trolls come to my inn. They demand a pot of stew and all my fresh juice, and they eat and drink and wrestle all night." She shook her head. "You two better get going out the back door. They'll be here any second." Dirch looked to Beorn and thought about the heavy snow, still falling. Trolls sounded bad, but not as bad as sleeping in a snow cave and maybe getting buried alive. "It's pretty bad outside," he said. "We'll stay if that's okay." Ida nodded. "All right, then. Take the table in the corner and keep to yourselves. Should be safe enough, I think." Dirch and Beorn nodded and settled in the corner. Dirch stripped off his snowy coat and overalls and hung them to dry. The inn was small, but it was warm and cozy. Their table had a small and greasy candle flickering with light. With a bang and a cackle, the door of the inn burst open. "Wah-ha-ha-ha!" said a troll, tromping into the inn. He was quickly followed by two others. They were broad and ugly, looking like lumpy potatoes with long, hairy arms.
"Happy Christmas Eve!"
"We are here for dinner," said one of the other trolls. This one had a higher voice and seemed like she was maybe a lady. She was even hairier than the first one. "So, you have our stew?"
"And our juice,"
croaked the third. He pushed the lady troll to the side and she tackled him back, and they started cackling and wrestling. They smashed 2 tables into splinters and knocked the candle off a third. It spilled onto the floor, spreading a waxy fire, and Ida rushed over and put it out with her apron.
"A cook and a firewoman,"
crowed a troll.
"What a wonderful host!"
The trolls all laughed at that, the same ugly cackle Dirch and Beorn had heard in the storm. Ida scowled and went back behind her bar. She brought out bottles and glasses and set them down for the trolls. They smashed the glasses and chugged juice straight from the bottles. When they finished, they smashed those too. Dirch looked over when one burped loud enough to shake the dust from the ceiling and shook his head. The trolls laughed and then turned when they saw him staring.
"What are you looking at?"
one sneered. "Yeah, this is a private party! Buzz off!" said the other.
"Or we'll pop you like a pimple,"
added the third. "Here's dinner," said Ida, interrupting to distract the trolls. She set the giant stew pot down on the table and gave each of them a bowl and spoon. They threw the bowls and spoons back at her, howling with laughter, and then started slurping the stew right from the pot. "Hey," said Dirch, "how about some manners?"
"How about some manners?"
one of the trolls said back in a taunting voice, and they all cackled again. Their voices were so loud they rattled Dirch's teeth in their sockets. "Just forget it," Ida said. She gathered up the bowls and spoons and walked over to Dirch. "It's one night a year," she whispered. "Just let them yell and break a few things and be rude and they'll disappear for another year." A handful of stew flew through the air and splattered into the back of Ida's head. She yelped as a hot potato chunk rolled down her neck and bits of meat stuck in her hair. Dirch started to get out of his seat, but Ida pushed him back down. "I'm fine," she said as the trolls laughed so hard they shook their chairs to pieces. "Just surprised me, that's all." Dirch sat back down, glaring at the trolls, and Ida went back to the bar. Beorn started licking the stew off the floor with gentle grunts and slurps. "Oh, the kitty likes the stew," the female troll giggled. "He's not a kitty," said Dirch. "Just leave us be."
"Humans have kitties as pets,"
the troll said, as though Dirch was the one who was confused.
"Isn't that right?" "That's what I've heard,"
agreed the leader of the trolls. They lived most of the year in dank tunnels and had never seen a bear like Beorn before, or a cat for that matter.
"Here, kitty kitty, come get some meat."
The troll pulled a big piece of gristle out of the stew pot and waved it in the air.
"Bror?"
said Beorn, looking up at Dirch. The bear trainer thought for a moment, and then a little smile crossed his lips. If the trolls wanted to play with Beorn, he'd let them try. "Go ahead, boy," he said.
"Bror!"
Beorn said, walking across the inn. His big white paws thumped heavily over the old wooden floor. Ida looked at Dirch with concern, but he just winked back at her.
"Oh, good kitty,"
the troll said, still dangling the piece of meat.
"You want a bite?"
Beorn sat back and waited expectantly, his black nose twitching at the smell.
"Well, too bad,"
the troll said, and swallowed the meat whole.
"It's all for us."
The trolls burst out laughing as Beorn grumbled. "Get out of here, kitty!" "Roar!" Beorn said. He had been offered a treat, and as Dirch well knew, the bear wouldn't give up until he got one. "What do you want?" the other troll said. "Get on, kitty, get!" She took a spoonful of stew and flung it in the bear's face. And that was a big mistake. Beorn stood up on his hind legs. Suddenly, he didn't look so soft and fluffy. He looked like an 8-foot-tall wall of white fur and hulking muscle. He crashed his front paws onto the table, splashing the stew all over the trolls. They hollered and fell backwards out of their seats, and Beorn began to slurp up their dinner with his long purple tongue.
"Bad kitty!"
shrieked one of the trolls. He scooped up a spoon and whapped it down onto the back of Beorn's head.
"Roar!"
the bear roared, enraged. He turned, and with one swipe of his massive paw, he sent the trolls tumbling into the wall. The others jumped onto his back, and Beorn rolled over, squishing them under his bulk. They stumbled up and charged him with pieces of broken table, but Beorn swatted them to the side, sending one head first into the fire.
"Oh, hot, hot, hot!"
he shrieked, swatting at his hairy arms.
"Bad kitty! Bad kitty!"
From his table in the corner, Dirch just smiled and laughed. For the next 5 minutes, Beorn and the trolls wrestled all through the inn, and the bear beat the trolls into squished, squashed, bruised, battered black and blue bumps. Finally, covered in claw marks and bite marks and scorch marks, the 3 trolls stumbled to the front door.
"Bad kitty!"
the leader shrieked as they fled through the door.
"Roar!"
Beorn roared a final time, his giant paws slamming the door shut behind them. Satisfied, the bear turned and went to the trolls' now shattered table and began to slurp up the stew. "That went well," Ida said, smiling now that she was free of the trolls. "Sure did," Dirch said. He crossed the room and scratched Beorn between his fuzzy white ears. "That's a good kitty." Ida started laughing and Dirch joined her, and together they cleaned the inn and made themselves a fresh pot of stew. The next day, Dirch delivered Beorn to the king. He was so well received that Dirch was offered a job, and he stayed on to take care of Beorn and the rest of the king's animals. Ida had a peaceful year, and the next Christmas Eve, one of the trolls stuck his head carefully through the door.
"Hey, do you still have that kitty?"
he asked. "Oh, I sure do," Ida replied. "In fact, she just had 7 kittens. Would you like to meet them?" The troll screamed and fled back into the night, and they never came back to bother Ida or her inn ever again. The end. Thanks for listening.